Good morning and welcome to Spark Festival 2020. This is very exciting. It is a Monday morning. It is 8 a.m. I'm super impressed with everyone who is watching this right now, whether you're logging in from bed, whether you're logging in on your phone on the way to home office. It's just amazing you guys can be here. So I'm super pumped to kick off Spark Festival with a presentation called The 7 Steps to Achieving Cult Status. My name is Tim Duggan. I am the co-founder and the editor-at-large of a company called Junkee Media. We are a digital millennials publisher. And I've spent the past few years researching, speaking to over 50, 60 people, going around the world back when we could travel around the world, and really exploring what it is about certain companies that have what I call cult status. Now, my definition of cult status, we'll talk about a little bit as we go on, is essentially businesses that have really passionate communities around them. And so what I'm going to share with you over the next 30 minutes or so is essentially all the learnings that I found. So if you've read the book, great. You don't actually go read it. I'm actually going to give you the cheat sheet to what it's about now. I'm going to take you through what those 7 steps are. So first thing I want to talk about is probably the biggest trend that I've noticed in the past 15 years of digital publishing that I've been doing this. There's something really fascinating happening in the world right now that I want to talk about this morning. And that is that we're going to be talking a lot about millennials and Gen Z. And the reason why is that their growing spending power and influence over the next decade or two is going to be really the story of commerce and the story of startups and the story of business. And what we're seeing right now is that there's a really interesting 2 trends that are both hitting into each other at the same time. So let's start by talking about the changing attitudes of millennials and Gen Zs first. So the company that I co-founded, Junkee Media, we made it our mission to know more about young Australians than anyone else. And one of the ways that we did this was we teamed up with an independent research company called Pollinate. And over the past 10 years, we've spoken to over 25,000 people and tracked how they're thinking, how they're reacting to things, what they want from businesses and brands, so that we as creators could become better at it, and so that we could work with other businesses and also explain to them all of the changing demographics that's going on. This is just some of the research that we've done over the past 10 years. And I kind of today want to talk about one of these trends that we noticed, which is probably the most important trend that I've seen over the past 10 years of research. This is it here. And essentially, this is 6 years worth of data that we've spoken to millennials and Gen Zs, and we asked them what they want out of brands. So if you are building a brand or building a business, this is really important stuff. So here is some of the data, but I have to give a caveat here, which is I've actually left the 2 most important ones off this because I'll share them in a second. So you can see that there's kind of some pretty standard stuff on there. There's reputation and reliability, but the 2 highest ranking ones, the second highest ranking one is quality. So this one kind of makes sense. Of course, young people want quality products. And if you're building a business or building a brand, of course, quality is something that you really should obviously keep at the top of your mind. But this one here is the one that I want to really talk about today. And this is that consumers want brands that act ethically and with integrity. And look at this graph here over the past 6 years. It has literally shot up like a bullet, just increasing every year. And this was the conscious consumer. This is not something completely new, but it's probably the biggest trend that we've tracked for the past 10 years. So that's one big trend. And then on the other side, you've really got this changing demographic kind of happening. And the changing demographic is that right now, millennials are up to 40. I'm 39 years old, and I often jokingly call myself the world's oldest living millennial, born in the early 1980s. Millennials are now moving into positions of power all over the world. They're founders, they're heads of state, they're politicians, they're CEOs, they're activists. And this kind of trend that's happening right now, this changing demographic trend is having a huge influence. So everyone from 40 under is really moving into positions of power. And the global spending power of millennials has overtaken Gen X this year. And that is only increasing over the next decade. So these two trends, this is what I'm going to be talking about today. You've got this change in attitude on one side, you've got change in demographics on the other side, and all of that is in fact being superpowered by COVID-19. So not only were these two trends kind of hitting in the middle, as soon as COVID-19 came along, all of these things that were slowly happening over time, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of talk about that over the next couple of days, have been superpowered by COVID-19. Some data that I've seen has said that there's 10 years worth of acceleration over just 3 months. So all of that is happening. And what it means is that we're living in this really freaking exciting time. There's never been a moment in history like we're experiencing right now. And that's why I think it's one of the most fertile times to start a startup. If you're thinking about a business, if you're thinking about pivoting, if you're thinking about got a business idea in the back of your head that you just want to get out there, right now is probably the most opportune time in the entire history of certainly our generation, certainly a couple of previous generations before that. It's one of the reasons why I really believe there's never a better time to have a good idea. Right now is a fascinating time, and really you should take advantage of that if you can. So that brings me to what we're going to be talking about this morning. And it is this concept: there is a business that has cult status is a business that's going to help you survive and get through tough times. So I wrote this book, and the book's called Cult Status. And I wrote the book for a couple of years leading up to this year. And the businesses that I spoke to specifically were businesses that had really strong communities around them. That's my simple definition of cult status. It is a business that has this passionate community around them. And then obviously COVID hit. And one of my first thoughts was that the book that I wrote was going to be completely out of date, because all of a sudden these businesses were going to struggle and going to find it really tough. And obviously there have been some industries, in particular travel and tourism, where that has been the case. But the most fascinating thing was that out of these businesses, the ones that had the most cult status, so the ones that had the strongest communities around them, they were in fact the ones that survived the most. So the businesses that are really winning now are ones with cult status. And as I said, a simple definition of cult status is coming up now, is a business or project with a really passionate community around it who really identify with its purpose. So this is why you can see the things that I talked about earlier around consumers saying that they wanted brands that act ethically and with integrity, brands with purpose who can clearly communicate that to their audience, and then the audience also believe in that purpose. They are the ones with cult status, and they are the businesses that are surviving through this period. They're thriving through it. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, it's those businesses that have this really passionate and dedicated communities around them that are the ones that are going to really explode and become the brands that we talk about. Another reason that I wrote the book is because I think when you think of a brand with cult status, often you think of big brands. It might be Red Bull, or it might be Nike, or it might be Apple. These kind of brands have been around for decades. And what I was really fascinated was that there's this whole new generation of people coming through right now who are building businesses that are going to have cult status in the future. These are going to be these brands that we're going to talk about in that same breath. And in fact, I think loads of them are coming out of Australia right now. And I wanted to celebrate that and talk about that and kind of also figure out how they did it, which brings me neatly into the 7 steps to building a business with cult status. So these are 7 steps. The first and last ones are really in order, but the rest of them can be done at any time. And the simplest things that I wanted to do was distill down, what do all of these businesses that are starting to build these passionate communities around them, what do they have in common? And I found that they had 7 things in common. So these are the 7 steps. The first step is really simple. So the first step is, before you do anything else, before you register your domain, before you think of what the title is going to be, before you go out there and come up with a marketing plan, or go and think of how you're going to communicate it to people, the very first thing that you should always do when you start a new business or start a new project is to stop grab a piece of paper and write down what is the impact that you actually want to have. If you can clarify on paper what the impact that you want to have is before you start anything else, that means that when things start getting a bit bumpy, as they inevitably will, you at least have a bit of a North Star that you're aiming towards. And the most interesting part was when I spoke to 50 or 60 of these entrepreneurs all over the place, from Silicon Valley through to Pakistan, through to Melbourne and Sydney. Almost all of them thought what their impact was first before they did anything else. And that really has been the thing that separated these businesses that have strong communities from businesses that don't. So one of the ways of doing that is kind of just stopping and thinking, what is the impact you want to have? And there's an idea called an impact statement that I'm really trying to popularize at the moment. So if you think about most businesses probably have a mission statement. Every business has, the top of their strategy, here's the mission statement. This is what we want to do. I think that's amazing, but I don't think it goes far enough. I think a mission statement kind of tells you, sure, what you want to do. But I believe that every business needs to, in fact, have an impact statement. And an impact statement is really a simple sentence that goes after the mission statement by adding the words "so that." So if you've got a mission statement that says, this is who we want to be, if you add the words "so that" and then explain why or what impact you want to have by being that, that is just a really simple and clear way of communicating to everyone, communicating to your staff, that's what you do, to your board, to your other management team, to your clients, to your customers. It's a really simple, tool that I think anyone can do. We only have 30 minutes to get through all 7 steps today, so I actually can't go too much into detail on this one. But if you do have any interest in figuring out what the hell an impact statement is, just head to cultstatus.com, which is my website, and I've got a couple of exercises there that can help you figure that out. A really simple example of a brand that has a great impact statement and a brand that is really growing throughout the past few years is Allbirds. Allbirds are an amazing shoe company co-founded by Tim Brown, the former vice captain of the New Zealand soccer team. I spent some time with Tim over in San Francisco, going through the offices and just really understanding what it is about their ethically sourced, responsibly made shoes that made them so popular. And it really is a perfect example of those trends where you have people demanding that brands act ethically, and then you have people like Tim and Joey, his co-founder, moving into those positions to be able to offer that. And I think it's a really great example of what happens if you really clearly define the impact that you want to have before you start. At the end of each of these 7 steps, I'm going to give you just a little example. And I've tried to make as many of them as I could Australian. This one here, hey, Tim Brown is from New Zealand, so close enough. But I really wanted to go and localize some of these stories. The second step out of these 7 steps is to question all of the small things. So when you start something and you think about, you've got an idea, it can be super overwhelming when you've kind of got all of these like big important things to think about. And I understand that, I've started many ventures and sometimes it can be just a bit bewildering at the beginning to think about what you should concentrate on. So a really simple way of figuring out how you kind of question all these small things and have this curiosity around business is to think of all of the decisions and put them into something like this quadrant here. This is a really simple quadrant that has things like you can put, are your decisions important? Are they not important? Are they big or are they small? And often when we start something, we think in this top right-hand quadrant. It's these like big important things and we think that we should tackle these first. When in fact, it's actually these things in this little top left-hand quadrant, which are small but important, that you should really tackle first. And by doing enough of them over and over again, you actually build up the confidence to tackle those big important things. A really great example of this and one of my favorite Australian companies at the moment is Who Gives a Crap Toilet Paper. Awesome Aussie company that actually balances profit and purpose together. They donate 50% of their money to building sanitation and toilets in developing countries. They made about $12 million last year, obviously due to the great toilet paper shortage. But what they really did was they questioned all these small things. So of course, there's the big things like what should the paper be made from or where should you make it? But then there's small things like the wrapping paper and the packaging on the box and the emails that you get. And those things are almost as important for a company. Step 3 out of the 7 is refining your superpower. So this idea is not new. It is an idea that I just think is so important that I really identified out of all the businesses I'd spoken to that had these passionate communities around them. Almost all of them had figured out what it is that they do uniquely that someone else can't do. And whether that's a personal thing or whether that's a professional thing, I think both of those things were really important. But the concept of a super is, what is it that makes you unique? It could be an obstacles you've overcome. It could be where you were born. It could be skills that you have. It could be challenges that you have faced. There is really all of us up in the person in the cubicle next to us. And one of the slightly fun but slightly morbid ways of figuring out what makes you unique and figuring out what is your superpower, and I've used this myself, is Monday morning, it's 8:15. You probably don't want to think about death right now, but it is something that we're all going to face. And if you can think of the first few sentences of your obituary, it's a really simple trick to help you kind of figure out, well, what is it that makes you unique? Because when someone passes away, you kind of have to summarize them as quickly as you can and as clearly as you can. So one of the tools and tricks, and I've got 14 different exercises throughout my book for coming up with things like this. And one of them is writing your own obituary. So I thought that I'd introduce you on a Monday morning just to get your week starting well. Australian company that I think has done an amazing job really think of some of these questions. I'll go backwards. Perfect. Is GoTo, which is an Australian skincare company started by Zoe Foster-Blake. Those of you might know Zoe Foster-Blake. She was a former beauty director of magazines. She's married to the comedian Hamish Blake, and she started a skincare company called GoTo a few years ago that now has about 50 staff and this really amazing cult following. And the reason why this is an example of the superpower is because Zoe has really leaned into what makes her unique, which is she's super relatable, she's fresh, she's honest, and all of her products almost reflect her. The 4th step is called define your altar. Now, the idea behind this is that cult followings don't just build up around a particular product or service for no reason. So to gain the love of your community, you really have to focus all of their attention into one spot. So in religions, there's obviously an altar, which is normally the center of a place of worship. But for a business, the altar can be somewhere physical, so like a store or a conference or an event that you hold. And over the past 15, 20 years, it can also be a digital location. And in fact, that's one of the things that really sets apart most modern cult brands, is that a lot of them have digital altars, which is somewhere where all the community can come together. You can meet other like-minded people, and you can really share the love and grow the love of the community in one spot. And the things that these altars have in common is that they've all got a unique language and they've all got unique rituals. So if you want to build a community that has cult status, start looking around at some of your consumers or some of the things that you do and think around, is there anything there that you can ritualize? Is there any language that people use that is common only to your community? If you can identify what they are and lean into those and almost make an entire unique language and rituals for your community, that is one way that you can strengthen your community and help build a business with cult status. I'll use the example of Airbnb here, which is obviously an amazing company and have had a lot of challenges through COVID and are really leading the way with their transparency and openness. And one of the things they realized a couple of years ago was they actually didn't have an altar for people to come together. So they launched something called Airbnb Open. And I was lucky enough to attend it a few years ago. And it was started by a guy called Chip Conley, who's one of the founding board members of Burning Man, and who came aboard, came to Airbnb to kind of help understand how they can unlock some of these rituals. And Airbnb Open was this amazing event with thousands of hosts all coming together to basically worship at the altar of Airbnb. It was this phenomenal experience. It's kind of hard to describe. It felt a bit like you were going to a religious ceremony. But if anything, it was a really nice example of how they've been able to kind of harness the power of their community and bring them all together into one spot. The fifth step out of 7 steps in the last remaining 10 minutes we have of this presentation is to drop the bullshit. The idea of there is so much noise in our world today. Everyone is trying to tell you something or sell you something all at the same time. And what sets most cult brands apart from their audience, apart from others, that their audience wants to hear from them. So think through to your own social media feed. You can get ads bombarding you, and then you can come across either people or brands that you've followed that you want to follow because they add some value to your life, or they're honest, or they're transparent, or they speak to you exactly like your friends speak to you. So the idea here is that transparency and openness are of the biggest things that people want in a brand. Part of our research that we've asked people over the previous years has been asking them what do they want from a brand, and almost everyone says they want them to be transparent and honest. There's a term called best friend marketing, which is essentially when a brand speaks to you like the same level as you. And there's some amazing examples of brands that do this. I think Netflix is an awesome example of a brand that really speaks to you on the same level. A bit of a caveat there is that the company I co-founded, Junkee Media, we do the social media for Netflix in Australia and New Zealand. So that was a slight plug for Netflix, but the tone that has been developed there by Netflix globally, it's not something that we developed, it's something that they do globally, is really speaking to people on that same level. And I think it's pretty amazing. The simplest way of thinking about this is think of your favorite follows on social media and act like them. That's really easy to do. And a nice Aussie example here, this is a brand, it's not a business, although it is an amazing business, is Bluey. Anyone who knows Bluey will know what a relatable and great series this is. I spoke to one of the co-founders of Ludo Studios who produced Bluey, Daly Pearson, for my book. And he said that the best compliment he gets is when kids and parents come up to him and they say, it's almost like you had a TV in my room, a TV in our living room. That's how relatable it is. It feels like you're speaking directly to me. So a really great example of an Australian brand that is just doing phenomenally all around the world. Step 6, the 6th step to building a business with cult status is to lead from the middle. So the concept for this is that when you lead a community, you have a couple of choices on how you can lead them. You can either lead from the front, which means that you are kind of going ahead of people and people are kind of following you from behind. You can also lead from behind, which is a concept that Nelson Mandela liked to popularize when he said that he believed leaders should be almost like shepherds, shepherding their flock, but from behind. But what I found is that most businesses today that are building cult status are leading from the middle. So the concept of lead from the middle is that as a leader or as a business, you choose and show people the direction that you want to go. So you say, this is what this is what our mission is, and this is the impact that we want to have. And then what you do as a leader is you then let the community around you choose how they get there. That is really scary sometimes. You have to hand over some control. But it's also amazingly empowering because you are listening to people, and as long as they are kind of going in the direction that you want them to go in, then where they can take you can be kind of pretty amazing. An example of this getting out of control was Reddit in 2015, which was a pretty kind of crazy situation. I won't go into it now. I've only got about 5 minutes left. But there was an employee called Victoria Taylor who was fired by Reddit in 2015. And she was the liaison between the moderators of the subreddits and Reddit themselves. She got fired for reasons that were never quite cleared. And then what happened was the community essentially revolted. They shut down so many of the forums and the subreddits going on that the entire business ground to a halt. And what it means and what it shows is that when you hand the control and the power over to a community, you need to continue to communicate with them and show them and explain to them why you're making some of the decisions that you're making. And if you don't, the whole thing can turn to a mess. And what happened here was the whole thing actually turned into a mess. She got fired. The CEO, Ellen Powell, came out and made an apology. 3 days later, the CEO left. And the whole thing kind of turned into this big schmozzle, and kind of a really interesting example of what happens when you don't lead from the middle, and in fact, you let the whole thing turn into a mess. The final step is strap yourself in. This is actually my favorite step here, because I think the earlier ones are kind of all, quite lovely and kind of a bit, sometimes they can be a bit airy-fairy and a bit fluffy. Strap yourself in is business is fucking hard. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I'm about to swear. It's 8 a.m. in the morning. Business is freaking hard. Sorry, you can bleep that out later. And running a business is so hard. And the people that are attracted to it are people that want to make it work so much, they'll sacrifice so much of their life for it. In fact, a study by Michael Freeman, the MD from the University of California, found that entrepreneurs, when compared to others, had 2 times higher rate of depression, 2 times higher rate of suicide attempts, 2 times higher rates of psychiatric hospitalization, 3 times higher rates of substance abuse, 6 times higher rates of ADHD, 10 times higher rates of bipolar disorder. And it hasn't been figured out yet if that's because there is causes that, or if because people who are attracted to entrepreneurism are more is that so freaking hard to be prepared for those ups and downs. And the best way to be prepared for it is during the good times, before you get overwhelmed, before you get stressed, is to make sure that you've got really good self-care rituals going. I've got loads of self-care rituals, from having long baths to going for walks with my husband, through to just getting good night's sleep, through to exercise in the morning, all these kind of things. And most people think of these things as they get there or when they need it. And the key is to have them in place so that when you need it, you can ride those ups and downs a little bit better. So running a business is super, super hard. One of the hardest things you can do, but my God, it is the most rewarding thing you can do. I would not change it for the world. The amount of ups and downs there. I remember when I spoke to Michael Fox, one of the co-founders of Shoes of Prey for Cult Status, he was saying compared to his job at Google, the highs were higher when he started Shoes of Prey, but the lows were so much lower. So if you've got these like crazy ups and downs, your key really is figuring out how can you strap yourself in so that of course you're going to have them, but the highs are not as high as that and the lows are not as low as that. And that's kind of one really great piece of advice that I think he gave me, and that I know he's taking to his new business venture, Fable Food Co., figuring out how you can ride those waves. So that is the 7 steps to cult status. Step 1, think impact first. Step 2, question all of the small things. Step 3, refine your superpower. Step 4, define your altar. Step 5, drop the bullshit. Step 6, lead from the middle. And step 6, strap yourself. I really hope that some of these lessons that I figured out from my 15 plus years of starting and selling a business that I have learnt, and some of these stories from speaking to these 50 or so entrepreneurs all around the world who are all building these businesses with cult status. I really hope that some of these steps might help you along your journey. As I mentioned, starting a startup, building something, scaling up, growing is probably the most exciting thing that any of us are going to do in our lives. It is so freaking exciting. Right now, we are living through the most exciting period in our entire lives. It might not feel like that. I feel sometimes it feels scary and it feels like every single thing is thrown up in the air right now, and who knows where the hell it's going to land. But one thing is certain, is that we're living through a phenomenal time, and there has never been a better time to have a good idea. If anyone is interested in reading more about this or getting the book or wants to chat to me, feel free to go to my website, which is cultstatus.com. And I hope that everyone has an awesome Spark Festival over the next few days. And thank you for tuning in.